Hey there besties! Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're continuing our recap of the manhwa, Lucia. If you're new to this series, check the description below for links to previous episodes. Lastly, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy the video. It really helps our channel grow. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Lucia observed Duke Hugo as he prepared to leave. His attire made it clear he was finally departing for the capital. For the past few days, he had postponed his journey, choosing instead to remain by her side. While she was deeply grateful, she knew he had responsibilities to fulfill. He needed to arrive before the royal funeral concluded. The thought nagged at her. Had her illness disrupted his duties? Hugo turned to her, his expression filled with concern. "Are you feeling better?" Lucia nodded weakly. "Yes, I believe my indigestion has finally subsided. I shouldn't feel weak anymore." His brows furrowed slightly. "Is there any other discomfort? You haven't properly eaten for days. Are you sure you're not feeling dizzy?" She tried to reassure him with a faint smile. "Starving for a few days won't be the death of me. It's just a mild ailment." His expression darkened. "Mild or not, the fact remains that you're unwell. I have to leave for the capital now." Lucia lowered her gaze. So he really was leaving. "I'll be fine. Besides, His Highness must be wondering where you are. You've delayed your arrival long enough." Hugo exhaled sharply. Lucia was perceptive, more than the noblewomen at court who only saw her as delicate and demure. They would soon learn she wasn't as soft as she appeared. "You wouldn't trouble me in the slightest," he murmured, almost to himself. Even when she was barely conscious from illness, she had continued to ask if he needed to be in the capital, as though reassuring him. And yet, deep down, he wished she would be a little more selfish, cling to him just a bit more. Before leaving, he gave her one last instruction. "Get plenty of rest. Don't worry about anything else. Take your medicine and try to eat when you can." Lucia let out a soft laugh. "You seem to nag me more and more these days." Hugo smirked. "If it bothers you, then don't get sick again," he said before kissing her. After their kiss, he left her room, closing the door gently behind him. Outside, he turned to his butler. "Jerome." Jerome stepped forward. "Yes, Your Grace." "The Duchess's servants are astonishingly incompetent," Hugo said coldly. "Their temporary employment is at its end. Only the necessary staff will remain to manage the estate. We'll appoint new servants for Her Grace once we're in the capital." Jerome bowed. "Understood, Your Grace." With that, Hugo strode out of the mansion. Inside her room, Lucia stared at the closed door. So he's really gone. A small part of her had wanted to beg him to stay, to whine about how terribly ill she still felt. But she couldn't afford to become dependent on him. If she did, what would happen if he ever left her one day? Her sickness was making her emotions swirl uncontrollably. To what extent should a married couple rely on each other? She wondered. In the capital, Hugo was greeted by a familiar voice. My. Look who finally decided to show up," Prince Hessa said with a teasing grin. "Are you hoarding some secret treasure up in the north? I can't believe you haven't set foot outside the duchy for over a year." Hugo merely shrugged off the remark, his quiet demeanor unchanged as he raised his cup of tea. Prince Hessa studied him thoughtfully. He hasn't changed one bit. He recalled a conversation he'd had earlier with one of his advisors before Hugo's arrival. "The Duke is as untamable as a wild beast, Your Highness," an advisor had cautioned. "It would be unwise to attempt to confine him. A predator with no hunger won't chase a deer, even if it's within reach. He will resist anyone who tries to rein him in, choosing instead to stand by your side as an act of defiance." Prince Hessa had paused mid-step, turning to his advisor. "Are you implying I can't count on his loyalty?" "A steadfast alliance is far more valuable than unreliable loyalty," the advisor had answered gravely. "No king has ever truly secured the allegiance of House Taran. The Tarans are prosperous on their own. They need nothing from the throne. Simply recognizing what's already rightfully theirs will be enough." Prince Hessa knew his advisor was right. The origins of the Taran household remained uncertain, but even at the founding of the Genan Empire, they had already been an established noble house. The head of their family had once held the title of Grand Duke, and though they could have taken the throne, they had chosen not to. During the reign of the second king, a shift in power stripped all Grand Dukes of their autonomy. Most noble houses resisted and perished. But Duke Taran complied, and retained his position. While other houses rose and fell, the Tarans remained. They ruled the north, defending the empire's borders against barbarian tribes. And in times of war, it was the Duke who personally led the vanguard, delivering decisive victories. The people whispered that the Genan Empire owed its survival to the Taran household. Some kings had feared the Tarans and tried to suppress them, but they never succeeded. The late King Hessa VIII had been wise to acknowledge their role rather than oppose them. It had prolonged his reign significantly. Prince Hessa leaned back in his chair, considering his advisor's words. And I intend to do the same. Changing the subject, he grinned at Hugo. So, what was it like being a newlywed? Your absence suggests the Duchess is feeling quite at home up north. Neither of you have visited the capital once. Hugo's expression remained unreadable. It seems that way. She enjoys the quiet. Prince Hessa chuckled. How peculiar. My other stepsister, Catherine, is quite the opposite. She thrives on the capital's social scene. He sighed, swirling his tea. Catherine's high standards have kept her from marrying. She ignores me whenever I mention that being too picky will limit her options as she gets older. But honestly, I'd be more worried about the poor fool who ends up with her. Finding someone who can tolerate her vanity would be a miracle. He paused, glancing at Hugo. Now that I think about it, Catherine did have an interest in you, he mused. When she learned of your marriage, she locked herself in her room for an entire week. He set down his teacup with a soft clink. Outside of royalty, marriage is traditionally between one man and one woman. However, for the Duke of Taran, there's a loophole. No one would object if you were to take a second or third wife, he thought. He studied Hugo carefully. If it were you, I'm certain Catherine would be open to the idea. Then, with a smirk, he asked, what are your thoughts on marrying again? Did you summon me, Your Highness, just to say that? Does that make sense? Duke Hugo asked coldly, his voice sending a chill through the Crown Prince. Prince Hessa smirked. I was only joking. But even if you are a married man now, I'm certain others will extend the same offer I did, he added, trying to lighten the mood. Hugo's gaze remained firm. I would never even consider doing something so pointless. Pointless? But don't all men dream of being with multiple women? Prince Hessa asked. By all means, if that's your aspiration, then feel free to pursue it. If there's nothing else, Your Highness, I'll be taking my leave. Duke Hugo rose from his seat. Hold on a moment, Prince Hessa said, looking tense. The others will be joining us soon to discuss matters of state, so please sit back down, he pleaded softly. Hugo hesitated before offering a reminder. Don't forget you gave me your word, Your Highness. Prince Hessa's expression turned serious. I know. The key to drawing Duke Taran into the Empire's politics was his commitment to wholeheartedly support my illegitimate son's claim to his title, ensuring no one speaks ill of the boy, Prince Hessa thought. He remained silent, lost in thought. Despite my support, the reality remains unchanged. The boy is still a bastard, he thought. The Duke had married his younger sister, and soon they would have children of their own. Does this mean he'll treat them as mere decorative dolls? Though he had never met his sister Lucia, the thought left him conflicted. The entire ordeal was becoming a headache. After their meeting, Duke Hugo left the palace. From a room on the top floor, Roy watched him leave through the window. His eyes glistened as he recalled Duke Hugo's words to him earlier that day. You're doing good, he had remarked, patting him gently. My, he looks exactly like a loyal hound waiting for his master's return, Prince Hessa mused as he observed him. He approached, addressing Roy directly. Sir Croton, do you really have no intention of pledging yourself to me? Roy bowed his head slightly. None at all, Your Highness. Prince Hessa sighed. If you hadn't been by my side, I would surely have succumbed to the numerous attempts on my life over the past year. If you choose to continue serving me, I can guarantee you more wealth and power, he said, his voice serious as he folded his arms. Roy's expression remained unchanged. None of that interests me, Your Highness. And why is that? What is it that the Duke is providing you? Is it your admiration for him as a knight that leads you to follow him? The Crown Prince asked. No. It's because his grace spars with me. Prince Hessa raised a brow. That's it. Roy nodded. Sparring with his grace is the only time I can truly let loose without worrying about harming my opponent. Where else would I find that kind of exhilaration? He said, chuckling slightly. Prince Hessa leaned back thoughtfully. Is the Duke truly that formidable? Now that I think about it, I've never seen him engage in a sparring match. Usually, those skilled in combat enjoy flaunting their prowess, but he doesn't seem inclined to do so. He narrowed his eyes. So, who typically wins these sparring matches? I'm sure you've beaten him at least once. Roy laughed aloud. Me? Win? That is my lifelong goal. Prince Hessa flinched. Are you saying you've always lost? But I've seen the mayhem you've caused in the palace. Roy's smile remained steady. His Grace doesn't spar with me frequently. According to him, there's no point in exerting effort if he can't even kill his opponent. There are times when he doesn't even unsheath his sword, he just swings it with the sheath on. That's when I have to be especially cautious. Why's that? Prince Hessa asked, looking tense. It means he's in a sour mood. His Grace just beats me senseless whenever he's like that. And you're satisfied with being treated that way? Prince Hessa asked. I am one of the few men His Grace trusts, after all. Yet he beats you. Prince Hessa scoffed. Roy shrugged. It's His Grace's way of expressing trust in us. Normally, he'd just go straight for the kill. Prince Hessa exhaled. Seems the Duke's got a nastier temper than the rumors give him credit for. Elsewhere, in House Raymais, a father and son sat in the Grand Hall, discussing the formidable Duke Taran. Duke Raymais's tone was stern as he addressed his son. You must show Duke Taran due respect. He may be the same age as you, but he's akin to royalty. While our family holds the same title and rank, we are fundamentally different from the Tarans. Even the Crown Prince has invested considerable effort in involving him in matters of the court. It wouldn't hurt to exercise caution. Even I am obligated to treat him with proper respect. Refrain from behaving childishly and treating him as a rival. Should you challenge him, it could have adverse effects on your sister, the Crown Princess. Count David Raymais smirked. Worry not, father. I understand that he's a central figure who will lend crucial support to His Highness's rule once he ascends to the throne. It was already my intention to get along with him. Yet, as David pondered the matter further, a feeling of rivalry stirred within him. Duke Taran might have been instrumental in the war, but as a mere knight, he doesn't pose a challenge to me, he thought. Later that evening, in the palace halls, Count David Raymais sought out the elusive Duke Taran. Duke Taran, if you have the time, would you kindly grace us with your presence? Hugo studied the nobleman with disinterest, gauging the situation. The young count was the Crown Princess's brother, a connection that could prove troublesome. I get the feeling I won't be welcomed. David laughed. Ha, nonsense. I'm sure having you join us will make our gathering even more spectacular. I voiced my concern because I was afraid I'd be the only one in the spotlight among all of you, Hugo said with a serious gaze. You're as straightforward as they say, Your Grace. Will you share some of your brilliant observations with us? David asked softly, a faint smile on his lips. You can speak to your father for such things. Come find me if he has nothing to say, Hugo replied, walking away. The nobles exchanged wary glances as Hugo left, their whispers growing louder. I heard he holds the title of a knight, and I must say he's remarkably impolite. It would only prove troublesome if he joined our circle. David Raymais clenched his fist in anger. No matter how arrogantly you carry yourself, you'll never surpass my father. Our family has already forged a strong familial bond with His Highness the Crown Prince, he thought, his anger brewing. Back in the north, Anna stood before Lucia in her parlor. How are you feeling, Your Grace? She asked. I'm much better now, truly. Thank you, Anna, Lucia replied with a warm smile. Anna nodded in relief. That's good to hear. But just as a precaution, I'll prepare a tonic for you to take before your meal. Standing quietly in the corner, Jerome observed the exchange. She's grown noticeably thinner these past few days. His Grace must have had words with her, he mused. Jerome, I've noticed there aren't as many servants around, and some of the faces are unfamiliar, Lucia remarked, making him flinch. Well, Your Grace, most of the staff contracts have ended, he explained. I see, she said with a faint smile. She and the Duke really are alike, Jerome thought. Even with long-time servants gone, she doesn't seem the least bit affected. It's clear the household isn't at ease around the Duke and Duchess, yet she remains unshaken. Perhaps her closeness with him has influenced her. Then again, even when they weren't particularly close, she was always steady. More often than not, it was His Grace who took things to heart. His Grace left word that you should take all the rest you need and travel to the capital by the end of the month, Jerome informed her. I won't need that long to recover. It was just indigestion. There's no need for everyone to worry, Lucia said lightly. She wouldn't say that if she had seen his grace that night. We all thought our lives were in jeopardy, Jerome thought, returning her smile. Jerome and Fabian spoke in the hallway. Fabian, reviewing the reports, told Jerome that Dean had been tasked with escorting the Duchess. Sir Heva? Jerome asked, looking uncertain. Yes, Fabian replied. In fact, he even volunteered. Seems he's taken quite a shine to her grace. This isn't the Duke we're talking about, Jerome remarked. I was surprised when Sir Heva offered to be the Duchess's personal guard. I'm sure his grace would trust Sir Heva with guarding her, Jerome reassured him. Certainly. Oh, and his grace insisted that we take our time, expressing concern for the Duchess's health, Fabian continued, a chuckle escaping his lips. If I'd heard that 2 years ago, I would have questioned his grace's sanity, he added coldly. Cut it out with the disrespectful remarks, Jerome chided. It's clear his grace doesn't feel that way anymore. He's more eager than anyone for her grace to reach the capital. We're leaving for the capital in 2 days, Fabian said. I wonder when I'll be returning to the north, Jerome mused, gazing out the window, lost in thought. The north was harsh, too barren for farming compared to the Empire's fertile plains. Yet uprisings were rare. The people were known for their honesty and hard-working nature. A strict but fair reward and punishment system kept even the nobility in check. Under the Taran family's rule, the region had flourished, and the Northerners served as a crucial part of the Taran military force. The Taran family wasn't just a ruling house. They controlled vast wealth, gem mines in the lands they had conquered, large merchant groups, and lands across the empire. Their power and military strength made them a force to be reckoned with. If they wanted to conquer the empire, it would be easy. Yet Duke Taran, the family head, had no sentimental attachment to his lineage. He managed his estate with a sense of duty, often showing signs of deep exasperation. Occasionally, a glimpse of his inner thoughts escaped, and his face showed how truly weary he felt. When was the last time I saw that tired expression on his grace's face? Jerome wondered, thinking of Hugo and Lucia together, their smiles evident. Meanwhile, a secret meeting was underway with the most powerful figures in the empire discussing the political state. Duke Hugo spoke first. A war is inevitable. We must act before our opponents do. Marquis Philippe nodded in agreement. The allied forces in the southwest are in turmoil after their defeat. Civil unrest is rising, taxes are up, and several regions are changing hands, Marquis Philippe added. The only way to avoid a national crisis is to go to war. We must act swiftly. It's imperative that you ascend to the throne, Your Highness, Marquis Descamps added. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Prince Hessa. Despite the peace, it was clear the war had only been a temporary ceasefire. Both Marquis Philippe and Marquis Descamps seemed eager to take immediate action, Prince Hessa thought, pondering their words silently. These men are among the most influential in the empire. It won't be easy for all 5 of us to gather like this again. We must find the right moment to eliminate the Crown Prince's stepbrothers, Marquis Philippe began, but Prince Hessa interrupted. What's your opinion, Duke Taran? He asked, drawing all eyes to him. I agree with Duke Ramai's view. For now, let them be. Allow them to grow stronger, Duke Taran said, causing a few raised eyebrows. Why not eliminate them right away? What's the problem? Prince Hessa asked, concerned. Duke Taran's deep voice cut through the tension. There's always a risk in attacking prematurely. If we must strike, we should aim for the root of the issue. Carelessness may create an enemy in the midst of war. His words hung in the air as everyone considered them. Prince Hessa sighed. That's true. What am I to do? Both sides make valid points, he thought. If it were your decision, would you not act immediately? Prince Hessa asked. Duke Taran's lips curled into a slight smile. If it were up to me, I would have dealt with them already. Prince Hessa looked stunned. But you just emphasized targeting the root, not eliminating minor threats. Duke Taran's expression remained indifferent. While that may be the standard approach, Your Highness, you mustn't forget that I am not you. I lack the patience for anything that bothers me. I'd simply deal with it and move on. The room grew tense at his brutal honesty. If I recall correctly, the purge in the north occurred about a year and a half ago. Even the king, who rarely interferes with northern affairs, was disturbed by it, Prince Hessa thought, remembering the bloody incident. Should they pose a future threat, we can always remove them again. I won't oppose your decision. But I recognize that you may not share my lack of concern for the consequences. The Crown Prince sighed deeply. I think it's best to observe the situation for now. What do you all think? Agreed, they all nodded. As the meeting concluded, Marquis Philippe's thoughts wandered. His aggressive tone had swayed the Crown Prince to support his view. This man, Duke Taran, his deceptively cunning despite his aloof demeanor. I'm glad he's not driven by political ambition. If he were, David wouldn't stand a chance. He's in a league of his own, the Marquis thought. That night, Duke Hugo received word about Lucia's departure to the capital. Vivian has left. I see, he said quietly. She should arrive in about 10 days. After a draining meeting, Hugo felt weary even as he returned to his estate. There's not much to do when I get home, he thought as he opened his door. Back in the north, someone was waiting for him. As he stepped into his residence, memories of Lucia's warm smile filled his thoughts. He remembered the gentle gaze she gave him and their moments together. For the first time, he understood what it meant to come home. Meanwhile, Lucia, nestled in a carriage on her way to the capital, glanced out the window, lost in thought. Your Grace, please don't hesitate to tell me if you feel weary, Anna said gently. I'm fine, Lucia replied with a soft chuckle. There are still days left before we reach the capital. It feels longer than the journey from the capital to the north, she thought. It really is far. I'm reminded of what he said during our carriage ride home from the capital after our wedding. You're free to stay in the capital if you wish, she recalled his cold voice. If I had stayed in the capital without him, we might still be strangers, she thought. But I chose to go with him. I'm so glad I did. Though we have our flaws, at least we've grown closer, unlike those who only marry for appearances. I've come to understand him, even just a little. I can't wait to see him again, she thought, smiling to herself as the carriage rocked gently. Duke Hugo arrived at his estate late at night. Stepping out of his carriage, he adjusted his sleeves when a familiar voice drew his attention. Have you been well, Your Grace? Looking up, he saw Jerome standing before him, his expression calm. When did you arrive? Hugo asked. We arrived in the morning with Her Grace, Jerome replied as they began walking toward the castle. Hugo's steps quickened. Were there any problems? Not at all, Your Grace. The Duchess remained safe and in good health throughout the journey. Upon arrival, she took an afternoon nap and returned to her chambers not long ago, Jerome said with a small smile. Hugo wasted no time, heading straight to Lucia's room. Pausing at the door, he opened it gently and stepped inside. She was sleeping peacefully. Lucia, he whispered. She stirred, rubbing her eyes. Hugh? Did you just get back? Without a word, he pulled her into an embrace, catching her off guard. Her cheeks warmed as she sank into his arms. We're finally together, she thought. The next morning, Lucia stirred as sunlight filtered through the window. She blinked, then jolted when she saw Hugo sitting up in bed beside her. It's morning, and Hugh's still here, she thought, staring at him. Did you sleep well? He asked, watching her with a calm expression. She gasped, her face heating up. I don't understand. What do you mean? It's late into the morning, and you're still in bed, she exclaimed. Hugo stretched lazily. I need to take it easy every now and then, too. He smiled. I can't say I'm used to this, but it's nice. I'd like to spend time like this more often. I'd probably be putting him in a difficult position if I told him that's what I want, wouldn't I? She thought. Instead of answering, she wrapped her arms around him. Hugo blinked in surprise. Are you trying to seduce me? He asked, his gaze sharp. Lucia's face burned. She didn't deny it. His lips curved into a smirk. She's not answering, he thought, leaning in to kiss her again. His hands ached to touch her, to claim her, to leave his mark on her skin. Damn it! He cursed under his breath, suddenly pulling away. There's a meeting soon. I have to go, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Lucia nodded. I know. Get some more rest. You must still be exhausted from the journey here, he said, brushing his fingers gently over her cheek. The one who robbed me of sleep on my first night here was you, she thought, though she kept the remark to herself. Hugo studied her quietly. She won't get sick again, right? I should ask the physician to prepare a tonic for her. She needs to build up her stamina. He kissed her forehead before finally pulling away. That afternoon, Lucia sat in her parlor while Jerome stood before her. I've been thinking about visiting a friend I haven't seen in ages, she said. But she doesn't know about my status yet. I do plan to tell her eventually, but for today, I'd prefer to dress more modestly. Before we make any arrangements, Your Grace, His Grace has requested that you see a physician for a checkup, Jerome said. He's concerned you may have overexerted yourself last night. Lucia stiffened. Overexerted? Her cheeks burned as she looked away. He must be worried because of the long journey here, she said with a nervous smile. It's just a checkup, right? Jerome cleared his throat. His Grace has also suggested that you begin taking herbal tonics for your well-being. Lucia's face burned hotter. This is clearly for his sake, so he can do as he pleases without me tiring too quickly. She recalled Anna's advice from long ago. 5 days straight, then 1 day of rest. At the time, Lucia hadn't fully understood the importance. Now, after more than a year of marriage, she was immensely grateful for that 1 day of rest. If I'm to take those tonics, I want them to be of the finest quality, she said, keeping her expression neutral. Jerome smiled. Of course, Your Grace. Also, Sir Heva will be free to accompany you into town. Later, they arrived at a small house on the edge of town. Lucia knocked gently but received no response. Is she not home? She thought, sighing in disappointment. It would be a shame if I couldn't see her today. Just then, a familiar voice called out. Lucia. She turned to see Norman standing with a man beside her. Norman, she exclaimed cheerfully, her face lighting up. Their gazes met, and for a brief moment, both of their faces turned slightly flushed. My goodness, it's been ages. You look absolutely radiant. I swear, you've grown even more beautiful since we last met. How have you been? No health issues or anything, I hope? Norman asked, hurrying over to Lucia as she examined her. Lucia chuckled. Oh, Norman. Let's continue this conversation inside. So, what have you been up to all this time? Norman asked as they walked in. Then she paused, glancing at the man standing behind Lucia. And who's that next to you? Lucia followed her gaze. Oh, I nearly forgot to introduce you. This is Thomas, my fiancé, she said, nudging him playfully with her elbow. Pleasure to meet you, Thomas greeted warmly, his smile easy and confident. Your fiancé? Lucia echoed in surprise. Norman grinned. All right, time to get a move on. I've got loads of catching up to do with my old friend, she said, gently pushing Thomas away. Why can't I join the conversation? He teased. Just get going already, she insisted, and with a chuckle, he complied, leaving them alone. Norman then turned her attention back to Lucia, and to the two men standing behind her. She tilted her head. And who are these two? She asked, her voice teasing. So, which one is yours? They're both easy on the eyes. I'm impressed, Lucia. Lucia blushed. It's not what you think. They're my guards. Norman raised an eyebrow. Your guards? Lucia, what on earth have you been up to? Jerome spoke up. We'll be waiting outside. Please, take all the time you need, he said as he and Heva bowed. They're surprisingly dignified for guards, Norman mused as she watched them step back. Let's go inside already, Lucia urged, pushing Norman toward the door. Once seated in the house, Norman poured tea. So that man is your fiancé? Does that mean a wedding is coming up? Lucia asked. Norman nodded. Yes, we are. We've decided to have the ceremony and then move to his hometown. Congratulations, Norman. So when are you leaving? The day after tomorrow, Norman replied. The day after tomorrow? You're leaving in 2 days? Lucia asked, visibly shocked. Norman smiled. Aha. If you had come by just a day later, we would have missed each other. But I was planning to rent this place out in case you ever came looking for me. Actually, I was on my way back from speaking with my future tenant when I saw you standing right in front of my home. What impeccable timing. Lucia smiled faintly, but Norman continued before she could respond. And while we're on the subject, Lucia, I'd really like you to consider taking this house. What? Lucia flinched, her hands tightening around her teacup. But this is the first house you ever bought for yourself. You can't just give me something so precious. That's precisely why I want you to have it, Norman said softly. This house is filled with memories, all of which include you. I'm reluctant to sell it, but I don't know when I'll return to the capital. And I'll be moving quite far away. Lucia fell silent, watching her friend. This breaks my heart, she thought. When I was struggling, Norman was the one who kept me afloat. It was her belief in me that gave me the courage to propose to Hugh at the Taran estate. I wouldn't be where I am today without her. She's not just my friend, she's family. But she doesn't know how much has changed for me. If she knew I was no longer just Lucia, but Duchess Vivian, would she see me differently? Lucia took a deep breath. For now, I should just say my goodbyes as the Lucia she remembers. Norman, I need to tell you something, Lucia said, steadying herself. I'm married now. Norman nearly dropped her teacup. What? You are? Lucia nodded. After the wedding, I had to move far away with my husband. I wanted to reach out to you, but I just never found the time. I'm truly sorry. It's all right, Norman said, though she still looked dazed. I'm a little shocked, but I understand. Now that I'm preparing for my own wedding, I've been swamped. I know how it is. Then her curiosity took over, and she leaned forward eagerly. So? Who's the lucky man? How old is he? Where did you move to that I barely heard from you? Did he propose first? How did you meet? Lucia hesitated, smiling softly. Norman caught it immediately. She's hiding something, she realized. That must mean her husband is someone important. A wealthy merchant? Maybe even nobility? Is he good to you? Norman asked. Yes. He's very kind, Lucia replied. And financially well off. Lucia stifled a laugh. He is. Very much so. Norman smirked and leaned in. And what about in bed? Norman, please. Lucia's face turned bright red. Norman laughed. Lucia, you're married. For heaven's sake, there's no need to act innocent anymore. I'm sure you've already done what all married couples do. Lucia groaned, hiding her face behind her teacup. Norman's laughter faded slightly. I tried to believe you were doing well, she said after a pause. But there was something that worried me. Lucia looked up. What do you mean? Some months ago, a woman visited my house claiming to be a fan of my novels. She never revealed her identity, but I could tell she was of noble birth. She asked about you. Lucia froze. About me? Yes. She visited multiple times, describing your appearance. She even inquired about the bank account I co-signed for you. When I pressed her for more details, she only said she knew you and wanted to check on your well-being. Do you have any idea who she might be? Lucia's mind raced. That woman might be targeting Hugh, not me. Perhaps one of his political adversaries attempted to reach him through me, she thought. She shook her head. No one comes to mind. Norman studied her face but let it go. It's been months since her last visit, but I thought I should ask, just in case. Thank you for telling me, Lucia said sincerely. Norman observed her closely. She's changed. Unlike before, Lucia carried herself like a noblewoman. Her mannerisms were more refined, her speech more polished. But that's ridiculous, isn't it? Norman thought, forcing a laugh. You know, she said, changing the subject, I really missed hearing your stories. When you were gone, I even hired people to gather information about high society, but nothing they told me was as captivating as the things you used to say. Lucia smiled. What things did you hear? Lucia asked. Well, there was one particularly memorable piece of news, Norman said, just as Lucia was about to take a sip of her tea. It was about Duke Taran's marriage. Lucia flinched. People like us aren't always privy to the details of aristocratic marriages, but news of the Duke's marriage was too intriguing not to spread. You won't believe it, apparently, they didn't even have a wedding ceremony. The Duke practically whisked his bride away to the north like some kind of kidnapper, Norman recounted cheerfully, her eyes glistening with excitement. Lucia stifled a laugh. Lucia, are you all right? Norman asked, concerned. Yes. I'm fine, Lucia replied softly, lowering her gaze as she steadied herself against the table. Anyway, Norman continued, according to rumors, the Duchess is so breathtakingly beautiful that nations could go to war over her. They say that's why the Duke was utterly captivated by her. Just how gorgeous must she be? I imagine someone like Duke Taran would have exceptionally high standards. Beautiful Duchess you're talking about. She's sitting right in front of you, Lucia thought, feeling dazed by Norman's tale. And, Norman went on, it's rumored that the Duke has imprisoned the Duchess. I can't listen to this anymore, Lucia thought. Norman, will you keep writing your novels even after you leave the capital? she asked abruptly, steering the conversation away. I'm not sure if my novels would sell outside the capital, so I haven't decided yet. But with everything I've earned so far, I have no financial worries. Plus, my fiancé's family has been running a shop for generations, and it seems to be doing well, Norman said. Oh? Tell me more about you two. How did you end up engaged? Lucia asked, her face lighting up. I thought you didn't believe in love, she added teasingly, making Norman chuckle. I suppose that's why everyone says life is unpredictable, Norman replied, a soft flush rising to her cheeks as she began recounting her story. Compared to the novels Norman had written, her love story seemed ordinary and cliché. But as she spoke, her eyes sparkled as if she were telling a masterpiece. Time slipped away unnoticed as she shared her tale, looking for all the world like one of the love-struck characters in her own books. Before long, the sun began to set. Oh my, the sun's already setting. I talked about myself too much, didn't I? Norman asked as they rose from their seats. Certainly not. I was the curious one here. I really enjoyed hearing your story, Lucia assured her. Norman hesitated for a moment, then asked softly, and how about you, Lucia? Are you happy? Lucia was silent for a brief moment, her cheeks flushing. Yes, she said finally, smiling. I'm so very happy. Without warning, Norman hugged her. I'm so glad to hear that. Your maturity beyond your years always worried me. It was hard for me to leave the capital, knowing you'd still be here, Norman admitted. Lucia sniffled as tears welled in her eyes. Thank you, Norman. If I hadn't met you, Promise me you'll be happy, Lucia, Norman interrupted gently. Lucia's eyes shone as tears spilled over. Once Norman leaves, when will we ever see each other again, she wondered. You too, Norman, she said softly, her voice trembling. She's someone who genuinely worries about me, who only wants my happiness, Lucia thought. More than anything, I wish for your happiness as well, Norman told her, smiling calmly. Back at the Taran estate, Lucia had dinner with Duke Hugo. I heard you went into town today, Hugo said, his voice casual as he ate. I went to see a friend. She's the one I asked you to pass my letters along to a while back, Lucia replied, her face cheerful. Do you remember? Of course, Hugo responded with a warm smile. She's a dear friend to me, but she'll be leaving the capital soon. So, I was thinking, I want to organize some support for her in case she needs it at her new residence, Lucia said thoughtfully. I'll take care of it, Hugo replied, surprising her with how readily he agreed. Lucia paused, her heart racing as she processed his quick agreement. I didn't anticipate any opposition, she thought, her face flushing slightly. And I've been meaning to ask. Are you aware of the rumors about me that are circulating in the capital? Lucia asked, her voice uncertain. What rumors? Hugo asked, his tone turning serious. I haven't heard any malicious gossip about Vivian. Could it be that Fabian missed something? Hugo thought, furrowing his brow. Lucia hesitated, her gaze lowering as she spoke. It's really quite ridiculous. But, there's a rumor going around that I, the Duchess of House Taran, am so stunningly beautiful, that you've kept me captive in the north, she explained, her face flushing. I've heard that before, Hugo said flatly. Yes. What of it? They practically painted you as some kind of kidnapper. Lucia exclaimed, a note of disbelief in her voice. Considering all the other rumors about me, that's rather generous, Hugo replied coolly. And they're describing me as an incredible beauty. I was speechless when I first heard, Lucia continued, her tone flustered. Picture the criticism that will come my way once I start mingling in the social circles here. Hugo remained silent, his expression unreadable. I fail to grasp what you mean, he finally said. It's evident that the rumors have painted an inaccurate picture of me, Lucia said, her voice tinged with concern. Again, I don't understand what you mean. You are beautiful, Hugo stated, his gaze unwavering. Lucia's face flushed as she looked at him, her heart racing. Please do not tease me, and with a straight face at that, she said softly, trying to hide her embarrassment. I'm doing nothing of the sort. I was only speaking the truth, Hugo responded calmly. Lucia fell silent, her cheeks still flushed, as she watched him with a flustered look. After a moment, she stood up from her seat and left the dining room in haste. In the hallway, her frustration grew. He's said something like that before, but that was when it was just the two of us. She thought, her face still flushed. I don't understand how the staff didn't even flinch when he said something so embarrassing. Just then, Hugo stepped in behind her and grabbed her arm. Vivian, did I offend you somehow? Hugo asked, his voice laced with concern. I thought it was a compliment that all women like to hear, he added, beads of sweat forming on his palms. Not at all. I'm feeling a touch embarrassed, because you said that in front of the staff, Lucia said, bowing her head slightly, trying to hide her reddened face as her heart beat faster. So, first, you tell me not to lay a finger on you when the staff is present, and now you're saying I shouldn't speak either? Hugo asked, his voice soft but puzzled. Lucia was quiet, her cheeks still flushed. Yes. It makes me uncomfortable, she said, before stepping closer to him, her arms wrapping around him in an attempt to calm herself. Hugo's face flushed at her sudden closeness, but he embraced her. Why should it matter what they think? He asked. Lucia recalled Norman's words before she left her house. Are you happy? Norman had asked her. Norman could ask me that question 100 times, and my answer would still be the same. Ever since I chose to put my complete trust in Hugh, I've noticed I'm less nervous and even a little happier, she thought, a soft smile forming on her lips as she sank into his embrace. Later that evening, outside the mansion, Fabian is seen by Jerome. Fabian, you look ghastly, Jerome observed, noticing the exhaustion in Fabian's expression. Oh, Jerome, Fabian said, flinching as he looked up to see his brother. It isn't my fault. I've been so busy ever since we arrived here, he grumbled as he climbed the steps toward Jerome. This again? Jerome asked, raising an eyebrow. His Grace has instructed me to ensure that the Duchess is not exposed to any unfounded gossip concerning his private romantic involvements, whether past or present. I've been running around all day and night, Fabian complained. Also, he ordered me to keep Her Grace's arrival in the capital under wraps. Jerome watched his brother's frustration with a knowing look. His Grace sure is thorough, he thought, observing Fabian's grumbling. The next morning, Lucia wandered the estate's garden, taking in the peace and tranquility. I never knew just how valuable these moments of peace and quiet could be, Lucia thought as she walked through the garden maze. Once I immerse myself in the social scene here, moments like this will be rare. I should make the most of this time while it lasts. Suddenly, she collided with someone, stumbling and nearly falling. I didn't mean to startle you. Remember me? It's been a while, hasn't it? A familiar voice said, stepping forward to help her. Lucia looked up, confused, before her eyes met those of Roy Croton. Since you're the Duchess now, I suppose I'll have to treat you a little differently, won't I? Roy said, grinning with his usual charm. But I'm afraid I'm not too knowledgeable about proper socialites and things like that. Lucia's face flushed as she beamed, accepting Roy's hand to help her up. I don't mind. There's no need for formalities. It's so nice to see you again after all this time. I've been hoping for a chance to thank you, she said warmly. Thank me? For what? Roy asked, looking confused. Remember the first time we met? You're the one who allowed me to meet with His Grace, Lucia explained. At the time, she hadn't fully realized it, but if it weren't for Roy, she would never have been able to meet Duke Hugo, let alone propose marriage. Jerome was supposed to oversee the guests, but knowing how strictly he followed his duties, she doubted he would have let her in. By pure coincidence, Roy had been the one to let her enter and meet the Duke. I don't think I would have had the courage to return if I had been turned away back then, she thought. Thank you, Sir Croton, truly, she said, smiling warmly. Well, I didn't really do much, Roy replied, his cheeks flushed. He recalled standing outside the door, unable to stop laughing at her proposal. He scratched his hair, still smiling despite his embarrassment. I suppose rumors are just that, rumors. He's genuinely kind and gentle. It's hard to believe he earned the dreadful nickname, the Mad Dog. It's surprising how untrue so many rumors in high society are, including those about me and Hugh, Lucia mused. By the way, I heard you've been serving as the Crown Prince's personal guard. Is it okay for you to be away from the palace right now? She asked. Of course it is. I'd choose death over staying in the palace any longer. Roy said quickly, placing his fist against his chest. I can't take it anymore, even if it's His Grace's request. I would have quit ages ago if not for the endless assassination attempts. The only exciting part was dealing with them. Have you ever had to guard someone's back for over a year? It's as thrilling as watching paint dry. Roy complained, lying down on the floor with his frustration evident. I see. It must have been a burden, Lucia said sympathetically. By the way, where is his grace? Roy asked, sitting up. He isn't here. He left this morning, Lucia replied. Oh, I rushed all the way here because I was hoping to spar with him, Roy said, sitting up. Take him on? You mean you planned on fighting his grace? Lucia asked, her tone tense. I guess you could say that. It's a form of sparring after all, Roy said, grinning. Oh, you meant sparring. But isn't that a bit dangerous? Lucia asked. No, not really. We're both veterans, not two amateurs swinging swords around, Roy explained, getting up and dusting himself off. Have you ever seen a sparring match before? Not once. But even so, I still worry about his grace getting hurt, Lucia admitted, catching Roy off guard. He stared at her for a moment before bursting out in laughter. You might be the first to worry about his grace's safety. As far as I've seen, I doubt anyone in this world could even come close to laying a finger on him. He's never even had a scratch, Roy said, smiling reassuringly. Is Hugh really that skilled of a knight? Lucia wondered, her gaze fixed on Roy. She remembered the knights she saw during her dreamlike experience running a workshop. None of them resembled Hugo. Maybe it was because he held a noble title. She wondered. Just then, Jerome's voice cut through the air, drawing their attention. Sir Crotin, he said, approaching them quickly with a stern gaze. Why does Jerome look so angry? Roy thought as he stood with his hands in his pockets. Jerome, Lucia called with a smile as he approached them. Your Grace, Jerome replied quickly, flashing a brief smile at her. I've never seen him smile like that before. Roy thought, still dazed. I was wondering where you were, Your Grace. Now that we're in the capital, it would be wise to always have a maid accompany you for safety, wherever you go, Jerome said quietly. Ah, yes, you did mention that before. I'll keep that in mind, Lucia responded, smiling as she glanced at Roy. Well, Sir Crotin, it was a pleasure talking to you, she said. Likewise, Roy replied, watching her leave the garden. Jerome's smile faded as he turned his attention to Roy. Sir Crotin, what were you thinking? She's the Duchess. You can't simply show up unexpectedly and approach her in such a secluded area while she's unaccompanied. Someone could have been watching. Jerome scolded angrily. Sorry, Roy replied absent-mindedly. You shouldn't act so carelessly, Jerome said, clearly frustrated. I said I was sorry. It was just nice to see the Duchess again. That's all, Roy said, rubbing his neck. Jerome's tone grew serious. Regardless of your intentions, she is a married woman. Exercise greater caution. His Grace won't tolerate your behavior indefinitely. He'd be furious if any rumors about you and the Duchess circulated. But His Grace has never been angered by gossip about his lovers before, Roy said, looking uncertain. She's not just any woman. She's the Duchess. Jerome snapped, his tone sharp. Watch your mouth. Don't speak so lightly of her. Roy blinked in shock, taken aback by Jerome's words. What's the meaning of that expression? You're getting on my nerves, Jerome added harshly, sending a chill down Roy's spine. Is the Duchess really that important to His Grace? Roy asked, trembling slightly. Yes, Jerome replied, sighing. How important? Roy pressed. More than you can imagine, Jerome said firmly. Roy nodded. So, if I keep acting like this, His Grace would be angry. You'd be lucky if that's all that happened, Jerome thought to himself, nodding in agreement. Roy rubbed his neck, trying to ease his embarrassment. Well, it's not like I dislike her, the Duchess, I mean, he quickly added. And why's that? Jerome asked. She doesn't have a foul scent to her, Roy replied, blushing. Scent? Do you mean her perfume? Jerome asked, perplexed. Not exactly. It's hard to explain, Roy answered, shifting uncomfortably. That night, Hugo sat in his carriage, pondering. Should I look into what Sir Crotin has been up to? His knight asked. Where do I even start? The knight thought. He's abandoned his post, shown insubordination, negligence, the list goes on. Leave him be. I'm sure he'll come crawling back to the estate once he's tired of sleeping on the streets. Though I have to give him credit, I never expected him to last this long, Hugo said calmly, his gaze steady. Duke Hugo considered the matter at hand. Since the king's passing, the balance of power had shifted. With the crown prince assuming the role of regent, opposing him was no longer just a matter of personal risk, it meant endangering one's family as well, for treason. Hugo knew that, as a result, it was unlikely anyone would dare to target the prince's life. Roy won't need to continue serving as the Crown Prince's personal guard, Duke Hugo informed his knight calmly. Yes, Your Grace, the knight replied with a polite bow. He couldn't help but think, I knew it. His Grace has always been so lenient with Roy, even when he's been neglectful of his duties. The knight understood that, in Roy's presence, Duke Hugo often showed a more human side. Perhaps that's why his Grace is so lenient. Though, that's just my speculation, the knight thought. Who is the most well-known designer in the capital? Duke Hugo asked, his voice steady. I can name a few, the knight began thoughtfully, before trailing off. But in this area, I'm certain he would favor a female designer over others. Who operates the closest and most notable boutique on this street? Hugo pressed, considering his options. The knight thought for a moment before answering. If you're looking for the nearest place, Your Grace, it would be either Monsieur Geoffrey's or Madame Ant's boutique. Then let's head for Madame Ant's, Hugo instructed. I knew it, the knight thought inwardly. They soon arrived at the boutique. Madame Ant greeted them with grace. Greetings, Your Grace. It's a privilege to meet someone of your esteemed stature, she said politely as Hugo took a seat. I don't particularly enjoy exchanging pleasantries, so let's get right to the point, he said quickly. As you wish, Your Grace, Ant replied, seating herself opposite him. I need a gown for my wife, Hugo said, causing the designer to flinch slightly. The Duchess. She's the talk of the town. Ant thought, suddenly tense. I see, Ant replied, regaining her composure. In that case, is Her Grace accompanying you as well? Is she waiting in the coach? Her smile was tense, though inwardly, her heart raced. Oh my goodness, I've been dying to meet her, she thought. But I must keep my composure. I've heard that designers are willing to come directly to your home if requested, Hugo said calmly. Of course. When would it be convenient for Your Graces? Ant asked, still smiling gently. Tomorrow, Hugo replied after a moment of thought. He paused, briefly lost in thought. Yesterday, I couldn't do anything except hold her because she was already asleep. Today is the 5th day of our 5-day routine. If we indulge in a passionate night as soon as I return home, Vivian might have trouble waking up in the afternoon, Hugo mused with a subtle smirk. No, let's make it the day after, Hugo said, changing his mind. You mean, in 2 days? Ant asked, her expression tense. I'm already fully booked for the next month because of the coronation. No, wait. This is the Duchess we're talking about. I can't turn this down, she thought. In 2 days it is, Your Grace, she said quickly, accepting the booking. Ant was well aware that the Duchess had been the subject of endless gossip among the noblewomen of the capital. Some claimed she was exceptionally beautiful, so much so that the Duke had whisked her away and confined her in the north. Her first official appearance in the capital will certainly attract attention, Ant mused. As the lady of the Taran household, my wife deserves the absolute best in every regard. Use the finest materials, no matter the cost. But it will be your task to persuade her to follow my wishes, Hugo said calmly, catching her off guard. Ant blinked, momentarily speechless. His devotion is overwhelming. I will decide whether to continue using your services based on the results, he added. Ant felt a strange sensation, like a dazzling light radiating from behind the Duke. It's too bright. I can't even look at him properly, she thought, feeling flustered. Who knew Duke Taran was such a romantic? I've seen men restrict their wives and daughters from spending, but this is the first time I've seen a man insist on spending lavishly. She pressed her hands over her mouth, her cheeks slightly flushed, before shaking herself back to reality. Come on, Ant. Get it together. You're a professional. Love doesn't put food on the table. Still, Hugo had given no indication of a spending limit. I need to establish a reasonable threshold, she thought, carefully calculating a budget. Finally, she wrote down the estimated cost and slid the paper toward him. How does this number look to you, Your Grace? She asked. Hugo glanced at the document with a calm expression, then picked up the pen and added extra zeros to the sum. Ant's hands trembled as she read the new total. That's 10 times the amount I was expecting. She felt lightheaded. Today might just be a turning point in my life. Then I'll be sure to visit your estate in 2 days, she said, struggling to contain her excitement. Then I'll look forward to your work, Hugo replied. You won't be disappointed, Your Grace. Ant assured him, rising respectfully as he prepared to leave. He paused at the door. One more thing. Recommend me a reputable jeweler. Ant hesitated for a moment before responding with enthusiasm. Of course, Your Grace. Though it may be difficult to find something truly suited for someone of your stature, I know a place that specializes in high-end, exquisite pieces. Oh. It's almost like he knew my cousin is a jeweler. She thought excitedly. Then I wish you safe travels, she said as she followed him outside. As his carriage pulled away, she called out, I look forward to seeing you again in 2 days, Your Grace. As soon as he left, Ant spun on her heel and rushed back into the boutique. Clear the schedule for the day after tomorrow, no exceptions. Prepare every completed gown, shoe, hat, and catalogue, she ordered, startling her staff. Yes, they responded in unison. Jerome made his way to Roy's room. Roy Crotin. It's almost time for His Grace to return. How long do you plan to sleep? Get out of bed now, he called out, knocking on the door. Jerome frowned. I'm coming in, he said, pushing the door open. The room was empty. He walked to the table and spotted a note. A note, he muttered, picking it up. I'm going to make a run for it since His Grace will probably be furious with me. P.S. I hope you'll stop being angry with me. Jerome. Jerome froze. Then, realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Roy Crotin, he screamed inwardly. Duke Hugo arrived at the jewelry shop recommended by Ant. I'd like all the accessories ready by tomorrow morning, he said after making his selections. Certainly, Your Grace. I will have them packaged and delivered to your estate promptly, the seller replied, pleased with the purchase. Hugo's knight, watching in stunned silence, thought, he just spent a fortune at the boutique, and now he's buying nearly every piece of jewelry in the store. Just then, a particular necklace caught Hugo's eye. As he picked it up, an image of Lucia's face crossed his mind. This jewel, it's the same color as Vivian's eyes, he thought. I'll take this one right now, he told the seller. Of course, Your Grace. The seller quickly wrapped the piece and handed it over. The next day, Jerome presented the necklace to Lucia with a polite smile. His Grace bought this as a birthday gift for you. Lucia peered at the necklace. A red diamond? Would you like to try it on, Your Grace? Jerome asked softly. She held it up to the light, admiring its deep red hue. The last necklace Hugo gave me felt too heavy and extravagant for my taste, she thought as she fastened it around her neck. It suits you wonderfully, Your Grace, Jerome said approvingly. Lucia studied her reflection. This necklace feels much more practical. Perhaps I'll wear it to my next tea party. At the tea party, Lucia sat quietly, cheeks tinged pink, as the noblewomen around her whispered among themselves. Oh my, Duchess, that necklace. It's absolutely divine, one lady remarked. Very stunning indeed, another agreed. Thank you, Lucia replied, slightly flustered. It was a present from my husband. Gasps and murmurs followed. Goodness. So it was His Grace who won the bid for that diamond necklace, one woman whispered. You didn't hear? It was part of a recent auction, another added, her expression tinged with awe. That necklace is worth an unfathomable amount in gold, she continued, sending a chill down Lucia's spine. Lucia forced a smile, but inwardly, her mind raced. This reminds me of the time I nearly had a heart attack. Did he spend an outrageous amount on this too? I wouldn't be surprised if this necklace cost as much as a few castles. That night, alone in her room, Lucia glanced at the necklace still resting around her neck. Do you not like it? Hugo's voice came from behind her. She turned, startled. Oh, that's not it. I was just wondering, is today a special occasion? She asked, fingers tightening around the pendant. It doesn't have to be a special occasion for me to get you something, Hugo replied with a quiet laugh, stepping away from her dressing table. Lucia hesitated. I don't know much about jewelry, but this necklace isn't absurdly expensive, is it? Hugo, now lying on the bed, glanced at her with a calm expression. Is that what you'd like? Something expensive? He asked casually. There's another auction next month, so... That's not what I meant. Lucia gasped, eyes wide. Hugo watched her reaction with quiet amusement. Your husband is wealthier than you may realize. As his wife, you should take advantage of that and enjoy yourself, he said gently. Lucia remained silent. Inwardly, she recalled the Duchess of the Taran household she had seen in her dreams, draped in extravagant gowns and adorned with lavish accessories, yet utterly unhappy. A quiet fear settled in her heart. If Hugo ever left me, would I end up like her? Trying to fill the emptiness with meaningless luxuries? Do you dislike the necklace? Or is it because I gave it to you that you don't like it? Hugo asked, watching her reflection in the dressing mirror. Why would you say that? Lucia replied, startled. I appreciate the gift. I really do. It's beautiful, and I love it. A faint blush dusted her cheeks. You don't sound very convincing, he remarked. Are you angry? She asked softly, her expression uncertain. No, he scoffed, but his gaze lingered on her. Lucia studied him in return. In the past, his blunt remarks would have upset me. I would have bottled up my feelings and suffered in silence. But these days, I don't let his grumpy attitude get to me. She couldn't recall exactly when she had become comfortable telling him to sleep in his own chambers. And when did I start assuming he would indulge me so naturally? Hugo, resting his head against his hands, closed his eyes. She seems unusually hesitant to accept my gift today. If she can't open up to these gestures, what am I supposed to do? The next day, Lucia woke up and glanced at the empty space beside her. I have no memory of what happened after that. This always happens whenever I spend the night with him, she mused, stretching slightly. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains. It's already midday. Hugh must have bathed me and changed me into a fresh nightgown before leaving, she thought, running her fingers over the bedsheet. I do enjoy our nights together, but I really need to work on my stamina, she admitted, turning onto her side. Just then, a knock came at the door. Your Grace, you're awake. Your meal is ready. After you've finished, I'll escort you to the drawing room, a maid said softly as she stepped in. The drawing room? Lucia murmured, puzzled. When she arrived, she was taken aback by the sight before her. What is all this? She stammered, eyes widening at the stacks of ornate boxes. They're the jewelry His Grace bought for you. They arrived just this morning, her handmaiden said excitedly, her cheeks flushed. Lucia blinked. All of these boxes are filled with jewelry? She recalled the necklace Hugo had given her the night before. So that wasn't the only piece he bought. What is he thinking? You should go ahead and open them, Your Grace, the maid urged, her hands clasped in anticipation. Lucia hesitated but eventually relented. I suppose I should, since they're gifts. She lifted the lid off one box and stared. That gemstone is as big as a small rock. She picked up a pair of earrings and examined them. These look just as expensive as the necklace from last night. Every piece seems just as extravagant as the last. By evening, she was utterly exhausted after going through the countless boxes. Just how much did he spend on all of this? She wondered, rubbing her temples. There are still so many I haven't even opened yet. Even if he wanted to buy me gifts, this is too much. I'll have to talk to him about his spending when he comes home tonight. Then, she remembered their conversation from the previous night, how he seemed disappointed when she hadn't reacted enthusiastically to the necklace. If I tell him to return everything, will he be upset again? She let out a sigh. Maybe I should just accept them. What's the point of nagging him about gifts he gave me with good intentions? Besides, jewelry like this won't lose its value. If I ever need to, I can always sell them. She recalled the maid's excitement that morning. Did he personally pick each one, imagining how they would look on me? A faint blush crept onto her cheeks. I've decided. I'll simply accept them, she thought, finally resigning herself to Hugo's extravagant generosity. Thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. If you enjoyed what you watched, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing that notification bell. Your comments mean the world to us and help us improve. The next episode promises even more excitement and unexpected twists, so stay tuned as we embark on this thrilling journey together. Keep the anticipation alive and we'll catch you in the next episode.